Here's a number to sit with before anything else: 632,000. That's the entire population of Montenegro. Fewer people than live in a single mid-sized American suburb, spread across a country you could drive across in a single afternoon, if the roads weren't busy folding themselves into hairpin turns around mountains that don't seem to care how small the country beneath them is supposed to. V.S. to be. And yet inside that impossibly small footprint sits the deepest canyon on the entire continent of Europe. A bay so dramatic that geologists have spent decades arguing about whether it's technically allowed to look the way it looks. A monastery that appears, from a distance, to have been poured directly into the face of a cliff, drawing more than 100,000 pilgrims a year from 3 different religions. An island that spent 5 centuries as a fishing village before it turned into one of the most exclusive resorts on Earth. And an independence that came down to a margin so narrow, 0.5%, that for 2 agonizing days in 2006, nobody on the planet actually knew whether this country was going to exist. This isn't a place that quietly earns its reputation. Every single thing about Montenegro seems built to make you say the same 4 words. I did not expect that. So let's go find out why. Start in the north, in the mountains, where the first surprise cuts 82 kilometers straight through solid limestone and asks you to reconsider what you thought you knew about the word canyon. Most people who picture a canyon picture the American Southwest, vast, dry, sun-bleached rock under an enormous open sky. The Tara River Canyon looks almost nothing like that, and that's precisely what makes it disorienting the first time you stand at its rim. It's green, densely, almost aggressively green, cloaked in primeval black pine forest that includes trees standing over 50 meters tall and more than 450 years old, growing directly out of cliff faces that plunge, in places 1,333 meters straight down. That's deeper than the canyon is wide in most sections, a proportion so extreme that from certain overlooks, the far wall seems to hang almost directly above you rather than across from you. The canyon formed the way most great limestone gorges form, but on a scale that took an unusually specific set of geological accidents to produce. Somewhere between 250 and 65 million years ago, this entire region sat beneath the ancient Tethys Sea, quietly accumulating layer upon layer of marine sediment on the seafloor. Then the African and Eurasian tectonic plates began their slow, grinding collision, buckling those seafloor sediments upward into the Dinaric Alps, the mountain range that now defines Montenegro's entire interior. As the mountains rose, the Tara River, born from the meeting of 2 smaller glacial rivers in the Komovi Range near the Albanian border, found itself with a steepening gradient and a limestone bed that happened to be both soft enough to dissolve chemically over millions of years and hard enough to hold a vertical cliff face without collapsing. That specific combination is rare. It's the reason canyons this deep, relative to their width, are so uncommon anywhere on the planet. And the reason the Tara Canyon ranks as the 2nd deepest river gorge anywhere on Earth, trailing only the Grand Canyon in scale, while claiming the outright title of deepest in Europe. The river itself carries a nickname among Montenegrins that tells you something about how they feel about it. The Tara of Europe, so named partly for its shape and partly for the extraordinary clarity of its water, which runs clean enough along most of its course to drink directly from the current without treatment. A claim that sounds like tourism marketing until you actually watch a rafting guide cup their hands into the river mid-rapid and drink. The canyon has held UNESCO recognition since 1977, protected as part of the wider Durmitor National Park, home to trout, wolves, brown bears, and golden eagles moving through terrain still cut by more than 80 limestone caves that nobody has fully mapped. Here's the surprise underneath the surprise, though. This canyon sits inside a country roughly the physical size of Connecticut, a landform of genuinely global geological significance, deep enough and long enough to be mentioned in the same breath as the Grand Canyon, exists inside a nation so small that you could plausibly visit its capital, its coastline, and its deepest mountain gorge within the same 48 hours. Scale, in Montenegro, refuses to behave the way you'd expect it to. That refusal shows up again. in an entirely different form the moment you drop down out of the mountains toward the Adriatic coast, because the next landmark on this journey has spent decades being called something that, geologically speaking, it technically isn't. The Bay of Kotor curls 28 kilometers into Montenegro's coastline, hemmed in on nearly every side by limestone peaks that rise as sharply as 1,700 meters almost directly out of the water. Sailing into it for the first time produces an almost involuntary reaction. This looks like a fjord. Steep walls, narrow, winding inlet, water so still and deep it mirrors the mountains standing over it. Travel writers have called it Europe's southernmost fjord for so long that the label has essentially become permanent in popular use. Geologists will tell you, patiently and repeatedly, that this is wrong, and the correction turns out to be almost as interesting as the misconception. A true fjord is carved by a glacier, a slow-moving river of ice grinding a U-shaped trench through solid rock over tens of thousands of years. The Bay of Kotor was never touched by a glacier at all. It's what geomorphologists call a ria, an ordinary river valley, carved the ordinary way by an ordinary river over millions of years and then drowned, relatively recently in geological terms, when global sea levels rose high enough to flood the lower reaches of that valley with seawater. The dramatic, branching shape people mistake for glacial carving is actually just the original river's drainage pattern, now filled in with the Adriatic. It's the same category of coastal formation responsible for San Francisco Bay, Chesapeake Bay, and Sydney Harbor, except none of those bays happen to be wrapped in medieval stone walls, Venetian bell towers, and mountains steep enough to make the comparison to Norway feel earned, even when the geology says otherwise. The bay's three main towns, Kotor, Perast, and Herceg Novi, each absorbed a different layer of the powers that fought over this stretch of the Adriatic across the centuries. Byzantine influence, then Venetian control that left behind the ornate stone palazzos still lining Perast's waterfront, then Austro-Hungarian administration, all compressed into a walled old town so architecturally dense that UNESCO listed the entire bay as a World Heritage Site in 1979. What you're actually looking at, when you look at the Bay of Kotor, isn't a fjord at all. It's a drowned river valley, wearing the appearance of one, a landscape that spent millions of years being carved by water in the ordinary, patient way, and then got mistaken for something far more dramatic, simply because the resemblance was close enough to fool almost everyone who's ever sailed into it. If the bay is a case of nature accidentally impersonating something more extreme than it technically is, the next stop on this journey is the opposite. A piece of human construction so extreme that visitors regularly assume it must be some kind of trick of the eye. Roughly 40 kilometers inland from the coast, embedded directly into a vertical cliff face, 900 meters above the Bielopavlichi plain, sits Ostrog Monastery, and the first time most people see a photograph of it, the instinctive reaction is to assume the image has been altered somehow, because a building this large simply should not be able to sit where this one sits. It isn't built at the base of the cliff, or carved into a gentle slope. It's inserted directly into the sheer rock face itself, its white walls and red-tiled roof appearing to grow straight out of stone that offers no visible ledge, no visible foundation, nothing that explains how a structure this substantial has remained standing since the 17th century. The story behind it begins with a hermit. In the early 1600s, a monk named Isaiah of Onogosht sought out one of the natural caves in this cliff face to live an ascetic, solitary life, carving a small cave church into the rock that he dedicated to the presentation of the Holy Mother of God. Not long after, Basil, the Metropolitan Bishop of Herzegovina, arrived searching for a place remote enough to escape both Ottoman pressure sweeping through the region and political pressure from Rome attempting to impose Catholic authority over the Orthodox Church in the Balkans. He found Isaiah's hermitage, recognized the same defensive and spiritual value in its near inaccessibility, and began expanding it into a functioning monastery, a place literally built into a wall no army could easily reach, and no authority could easily control. Basil died in 1671 and was buried inside the monastery he'd founded. What happened next is the reason more than 100,000 people a year from 3 different major religions, now make the difficult drive up switchbacks carved into the mountainside to visit a site most of them will never fully explain, even to themselves, why they felt compelled to see. Stories began circulating of Basil appearing in dreams, healing the sick, guiding the lost, resolving disputes between families who'd been feuding for generations. The stories didn't stay local. They spread across the Balkans, then further, drawn in by pilgrims who arrived skeptical and left, by their own accounts, transformed. Today, Ostrog stands as one of the most visited Orthodox Christian pilgrimage sites on the planet, and one of the few religious sites anywhere in the world regularly described as a genuine meeting point between Orthodox, Catholic, and Muslim visitors, all climbing the same cliffside stairs to touch the same rock walls where 17th century frescoes were painted directly onto raw stone by a monk named Radul, working by candlelight in chambers barely large enough to stand in. What makes Ostrog land as a surprise, rather than simply an impressive religious site, is the specific mismatch between its scale and its location. This isn't a modest hillside shrine, it's a substantial architectural complex. Churches, chambers, living quarters, decades of accumulated stonework, occupying a site so vertical and so exposed that engineers today would need serious persuading to attempt the same construction with modern equipment. 17th century builders did it with hand tools, rope, and the conviction that a monastery this difficult to reach was exactly the point. From a cliffside monastery built to be nearly unreachable, chapter of this story moves to a place built to be the opposite, a location so accessible, so visually perfect, that it eventually became one of the most photographed patches of coastline in the entire Mediterranean world, despite spending most of its history as nothing more than a small, working fishing village. Sveti Stefan sits just off the Budva Riviera, connected to the mainland by a narrow strip of sand, so short you can walk it in under 2 minutes. In the 15th century, local clans fortified the tiny islet as a defensive stronghold against Ottoman raids, housing 12 families inside walls built from stones seized from captured ships. For roughly 400 years afterward, it stayed exactly what that founding suggests: a small, self-contained fishing community, its population never growing much beyond a few hundred people, its economy built entirely around boats, nets, and the daily rhythm of the Adriatic. Then, in the 1950s, the Yugoslav government made a decision that permanently altered the identity of the entire island. Rather than let the aging fishing village continue as it was, authorities relocated its remaining residents to the mainland and converted the entire islet, every stone house, every narrow alley, every red-tiled roof into a unified luxury hotel complex, deliberately preserving the medieval exterior while rebuilding the interiors from scratch. The transformation worked almost too well. Within a decade, Sveti Stefan had become a magnet for European and American celebrities and royalty, drawn less by conventional 5-star amenities and more by the surreal experience of sleeping inside what still looked, from every camera angle, like an untouched medieval fishing village. Sophia Loren, Elizabeth Taylor, and a long list of 20th century royalty all passed through its narrow stone streets during Yugoslavia's socialist era, an odd and rarely discussed detail of Cold War-adjacent tourism history. One of communist Yugoslavia's most valuable hard currency exports wasn't industrial output at all, but the sale of access to a fabricated fantasy of medieval Adriatic life. Today, the island operates as part of the Amman Resorts Group, its handful of rooms among the most expensive accommodations on the entire Mediterranean coastline, and its silhouette functions as the single most recognizable image of Montenegro anywhere in global media, an achievement built on the fact that the island has now, quite deliberately, been 3 different things in 3 different centuries: a defensive fortress, a working fishing village, and finally a controlled illusion of both, sold at extraordinary prices to people paying specifically for the feeling of stepping into a past that, at this point, exists mostly because someone decided it should keep existing. Every surprise so far in this story has been about geography, geology, or architecture defying expectation. The final one is about something else entirely: the fact that this country, with its canyons and its cliffside monasteries and its fortified island villages, came within a single percentage point of never officially existing at all. For most of the 20th century, Montenegro's political identity was folded into larger federations, first the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, then Socialist Yugoslavia, and after that country's violent fragmentation in the 1990s, into a shrinking union with Serbia that by the early 2000s consisted of just the two republics. By 2006, pressure had built for a formal, legal separation, and the European Union agreed to broker a referendum on Montenegrin independence. But attached to that referendum was an unusually specific and, at the time, controversial condition. Rather than accepting a simple majority, the EU insisted that the yes vote clear a threshold of 55% before the result would be internationally recognized, a bar set deliberately high to ensure the outcome reflected something closer to genuine national consensus rather than a razor-thin, contested split. On the 21st of May 2006, a record 86.5% of eligible Montenegrin voters turned out to decide the question. What followed was one of the tensest fully democratic transitions of sovereignty in modern European history. Preliminary results put the yes vote at 55.4%, clearing the threshold, but by a margin so thin that the opposition coalition immediately demanded a recount, contesting roughly 19,000 disputed ballots concentrated in the capital, Podgorica. For nearly 2 full days, nobody, not the government, not international observers, not the millions of people across the region watching the outcome, could say with certainty whether Montenegro had actually voted itself into existence as an independent state. When the Electoral Commission finally confirmed the official result on May 23rd, the final figure came in at 55.5%. 0.5 percentage point above the line that separated a new European nation from a continuation of the union it had voted to leave. On June 3rd, Montenegro formally declared independence, recognized within days by the United Nations Security Council and, eventually, by Serbia itself. It's worth being honest about what that margin actually meant on the ground, rather than treating it as simply a piece of historical trivia. A vote this close reflected a country that was, and in some ways still is, genuinely divided over its own identity, a division that surfaces even now in ongoing debates within Montenegro over language, religious affiliation, and cultural closeness to Serbia. The 55.5% wasn't a landslide expression of unified national purpose. It was the bare minimum required threshold, cleared by the narrowest of margins the rules allowed, in a country where nearly half the population who turned out that day voted the other way. Montenegro's independence wasn't just a mildly close election. It was, quite literally, decided by a fraction of a percentage point that the international community had specifically pre-agreed would be the difference between a country existing and a country not existing at all. That single fact recontextualizes everything else in this story. The deepest canyon in Europe, the cliffside monastery drawing pilgrims from 3 faiths, the fishing village turned royal retreat, the drowned river valley mistaken for a fjord. Every one of those landmarks exists inside a nation whose entire legal existence, less than 2 decades ago, was genuinely uncertain for the better part of 48 hours. Montenegro isn't simply a small country that happens to contain outsized natural and cultural landmarks. It's a small country whose very right to claim those landmarks as belonging to an independent nation, rather than a province of somewhere else, was decided by a margin thinner than most opinion polls' stated margin of error. There's a pattern worth naming before this ends, because it connects every location in this story more tightly than geography alone ever could. A canyon too deep for the size of the country holding it. A bay so dramatic it gets mistaken for something more extreme than it actually is. A monastery built somewhere construction should have been functionally impossible. An island that keeps reinventing what it's allowed to be. A nation whose existence cleared its own legal bar by less than a single percentage point. Montenegro doesn't just contain surprises. It seems to specifically require them, as if a country this small needed every one of its landmarks, and even its own founding, to overperform the scale everyone assumed it was working with. So here's the question worth taking with you after this ends. How many other places on the map have you already written off as too small to be worth a second look simply because nobody ever told you to check? This documentary draws on verified geographic, geological, historical, and political reporting about real locations and events in Montenegro. No fictional characters have been introduced. All named places, figures, and events are drawn from documented sources.
you